Welcome everyone to this session of Veganuary. I'm Jan Wright and I'm a member of the Brahma Kumaris Environment Initiative. Today is our last program for Veganuary. For those who haven't heard about Veganuary, it is a program that inspires people to try being vegan for January and beyond. Veganuary is a registered charity in England and Wales. If you wish to know more, their website is veganuary.com. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge on behalf of everyone the traditional custodians of the lands we're all standing on today. I am coming from the land of Yugambeh people in southeast Queensland, and I'd like to pay my respects for their care of the land, water, and culture here, and to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, earlier this month, we talked with Dr. Tamazin Ramsey, and she took us through her journey from her first awareness of vegan ethics to her actually becoming a committed animal rights activist and a vegan. Today, we will be talking to Klig Akerly. Now, we may have time at the end of the program to take questions from you. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and hopefully we'll have time to answer them for you. So from her early 20s, Klig has been interested in nutrition, particularly in finding suitable plant-based alternatives to protein. For many years, she ran a small plant-based catering company and became classically trained as a chef in her mid-30s. This led to her working in upscale restaurants on the west coast of Canada, and she has lived and volunteered in 4 continents. Klig has volunteered in many Brahma Kumaris centres and retreat centres, and presently coordinates the Brahma Kumaris kitchen at the Yarra Valley Living Centre outside of Melbourne. Welcome to the program, Klig.
Thank you so much. Wonderful introduction.
Now, everyone's journey on the path to becoming vegan appears to have a common thread, but there are also some quite different aspects. Your journey spans several decades. Could you share with us what prompted you to start your journey and what some of the milestones have been along the way to where you are today?
Right. So I started thinking about plant-based diet. At that time, in the early 70s, it was called vegetarianism. And I was interested actually from a political standpoint because I felt that's all that I could do to stand up against the increase. Really, it just jumped up the price of meat. And I said, this is really ridiculous. I was a student at the time and going to uni and like that. And I was like, this is ridiculous. I can't afford this, right? And so I had met a couple of vegetarians, and they told me how they were eating, they not eating meat anymore, and this is what their diet was like. And so I said, okay, let me try it. So I tried it, and then I really didn't see any kind of difference. I did my research and I found out, different kinds of things that I could use and replace. And one of the things that really jumped out at me about sort of to encourage me, because at that time, of course, I was, I think, the only one in my group, my social group, that was vegetarian. And even in the uni, there's probably like a handful of us, if that. And we didn't even really know each other, actually. I just came to know from at different social gatherings that, oh, this one is vegetarian, that one's vegetarian. So there wasn't very many of us. But one of the things that really inspired me was I had a dinner party for my friends. There was about maybe 10 of us. And half of them were men, so they were quite, heavy duty meat eaters, basically 3 times a day kind of thing. And I made the entire meal, and it was quite elaborate. It was like with a bread course, and I did a whole 9 yards, as they say. I made my own bread and different things. And no one noticed until the very end of the meal that there wasn't any meat in the meal. So I said, yes, I can do this. So I just sort of carried on from there, and I worked organizing the food for university project up north in Canada, and cooked vegetarian meals up there. And yeah, so it was very interesting in the early days. And then when I started to, I had a son when I was in my 30s, and I raised him as vegetarian, and I just started to do more and more research and realized that it really was not, it was really very healthy for me, and I was getting everything that I needed. I was quite healthy. And so I just sort of kept carrying on. And then I realized that I sort of moved from the political to the health aspect of vegetarian and vegan lifestyle. And after that, then I kind of graduated into the spiritual aspect of it.
That's really, a good overview of your starting point. But could you tell us what was actually the motivating factor that made you change to being vegan? It sounds like you were vegetarian, but obviously there was some other factor that made you change to become vegan.
Right. So I started looking at the option of plant-based diet when I contracted, I think I was in my late 50s. I had developed arthritis, and at one point it was quite bad, and I couldn't use my one leg. It was worse than the other, and I was really quite, I didn't feel I was very old at 50. And then I was looking forward, and of course I had up until that point done quite a bit of service for the Brahma Kumaris, and I just couldn't see myself looking forward in the next 10 years to not doing the same thing that I had been doing. So I didn't want my body to limit me from that service. And so I went to my nutritionist and my naturopathic doctor, who's also a nutritionist, and she recommended this. Basically, it was a food fast with supplements to help to cure the arthritis. And I went on, I was quite dedicated to it, and went on the diet, and it was a very, very limited kind of diet. Like I think there was maybe 2 or 3 kinds of nuts I could eat, a couple grains I could eat. Even the vegetables and the fruit were very, very limited. But the result was that the arthritis went after a very short period of time. And I had actually had arthritis for probably since I was in my probably late 40s, but I had minimized it because it wasn't as bad as other friends of mine had it, with that crippling kind of look and pain. And it wasn't that bad until it really got bad. So that really made me pay attention. And that was really my motivating factor, was the was the health aspect. And then as I got more involved in healing my own body, then I became very interested to help others also in the same way. And so I started to also look at the impact from a spiritual point of view, and how I was really doing the best that I could for the planet by not eating any eggs, any fish, anything like that was related to an animal. And I just saw also how absolutely devastating it was, really, and it is, for the environment. And that really inspired me to keep going.
Right.
And to help promote, plant-based. And here at Yarra Valley, so many people have benefited by eating just over a period of 3 days or 5 days, eating nothing but a plant-based diet. They can see the changes in their metabolism, in their body, and they are quite convinced that it's the right thing to do.
Right, that's great. Yeah. So you've had that great interest in food, obviously, all your life.
Yes.
And you've worked in the food industry for such a span of years. So you would have seen how the food diet in mainstream society has changed. 40 years ago, vegetarianism was almost unheard of. And,
yes.
And then maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, veganism was very rare. So how would you explain the movement into more refined plant-based diets over the years?
Well, I think that the environmental impact, I think, has a lot to do with it. Plus, also, there's been a lot of research in the past 20 years on the health benefits of plant-based diet. And I like the word plant-based rather than vegan, because plant-based is more inspiring for people. It means most of my diet is eating plants or things from plants. And then if there's a small amount, still as my comfort food or whatever, then that's okay, because mostly I'm helping the body to become well. And so I think it's both the environmental research that's really inspiring a lot of people. Plus, they see examples, like, for example, elite athletes. They see the result of their eating plant-based, and that's also very inspiring for other people. Like when we model good behavior and we model our virtues to others want to be the same. When I model kindness, other people want to also be kind to others, and be kind to the animals. And there's a lot of research now that's out there that shows about the cruelty to animals and like that. So yeah, I think that's the big factors, those two big factors, environmental and health.
And health, yes. And people need an example, don't they? Often they might think of something, oh, this sounds like a good idea, but when they have an example, a role model that they can follow, then it has a greater impact on greater motivation for them to to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do.
Yes, I agree. It's really, I think, important. I mean, I'm seeing that a lot here in Yarra Valley, more than I've seen it in the other retreat centers, just because we're a smaller retreat center and we're more a little bit more intimate in our setting, so we get to interact with people a lot more. And also just from what I've seen, different documentaries that are out and different people that are interviewing. The person that founded the land that we're on, his name is Dr. Ian Gowla, and he was plant-based and meditator in the mid-80s. And he used plant-based diet and meditation to cure himself from cancer. And so he wanted to show that to others. And then in 20 years, he really did. The foundation actually became international. So he really led by example, and still does.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good way to say, lead by example. Very good. Yeah. So I'm from speaking with you earlier and listening to what you have been sharing, it appears that you've had a strong attention to health and nutrition. So you were already a vegetarian and had been so for many years. You've already touched, on the fact of your illness, your arthritis. But could you explain to us a bit more the additional benefits to your health when you became a vegan, or as you like to put it, you were using a plant-based diet?
Well, one of the things that it really helped me to improve was my connection to my body. We're very disconnected as a society, the Western world society, very disconnected from our bodies. In my grandmother's time, and even my mother's time to some extent, probably up until the time I was a preteen, women were very much in tune with what they're, to do natural home remedies and like that. Like, for example, my mother never took anything more than an aspirin for probably the better part of 60 years of her life. And, like the drugs were just not a part of her thing, right? They always had home remedies for things. And certainly in my grandmother's time, they did as well. And they also ate literally from the land, and they also ate very locally. So they ate, and most of their diet actually was plant-based. And so I kind of grew up with that legacy, you might say. And also my mom grew her own, she had a little veggie patch in the backyard. We went out in the summertime to the various farms and collected berries, and we went out into the wilderness and collected, well, it wasn't really wilderness, but the countryside, and collected berries. And so I grew up in that kind of culture. And so when I went away from that, I really became disconnected from the messages that my body was signaling to me. Like, for example, I was having the signs of arthritis, but I was not wanting to pay attention to it. There were different signs that the different foods that I was eating were causing allergic reactions in my body. Again, I wasn't paying any attention to it. And so by focusing in on the plant-based diet, it really helped me to put myself kind of back in a natural state of affairs, you might say, where I'm more able to pay attention to the foods that I eat, and eat with intention, and eat with, to use a common term nowadays, mindfulness. Because I think mindfulness when I'm eating will really help the spirit, mind, body connection to work really, really well, and to work naturally, not in a forced way. So I can eat things that are, not beneficial for me. And then I see the result of them. And now I know that I will, if I eat, I get the immediate result from it. My main symptom is headache. That's what I get.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really helped me to really focus in on what my body is, kind of the messages that my body is sending me.
Yeah. And so, given that those effects on your body, how would, from your experience, how would a plant-based diet differ from a vegetarian diet or one that contains meat in the terms of digestion?
Right. So one of the things that is a scientific fact is that we have limited enzymes in our body. And one of the limited enzymes that we have comes around about 5 years of age. And that's the enzyme lactase. And lactase breaks down the protein from milk. So really from the time that that would be late weaning in old country terms, from that point, we're really not meant to have milk because the body can't produce it. So every time that we eat things that are not, that the body is not able to break down, as happened in my body, the enzymes are not there to break down the different proteins. And so then the body has to deal with it somehow. And so what it does is that it stores it as a toxin. So in my case, I was having, even though I was vegetarian, I was having a lot of milk in my diet. And over a period of years, because of course, when I first became vegetarian, there was very limited knowledge about it. And so I just basically was self-taught. And one of the things that I did was to, I compensated, because that's one of the kind of drawbacks that happen when we become either vegetarian or plant-based in our lifestyles, that we compensate and usually overcompensate for the protein. So either we're compensating in the way of getting too much protein or trying to compensate for the meat protein in our diet, or we are compensating for the calories of that protein. Now in meat, there's a lot more protein and a lot more, it's so dense protein, I mean, and then also a lot more calories that are associated with that, because when you have protein, you have fat, unless it's something like skim milk. But then skim milk isn't really milk because the fat's been removed. So how has the fat been removed? It's been removed through a chemical process or through some sort of machine process. And so the body, again, is reading that as something that's kind of like foreign, because it doesn't have the enzymes to break it down. And then also you're disrupting the flora and fauna, and plant-based diet will focus in on the flora and fauna for your digestive system and to keep it active. So bacteria needs to be produced, the kind of good bacteria needs to be produced, the kind of good cholesterol needs to be produced in the body every time I eat anything to do with animals, even if it's an animal byproduct. I'm ingesting something that the body really has very limited resources in order to throw it off. And then ultimately what happens is that all these chemical reactions happen in the body, and then it becomes a buildup of toxicity. So depending on the weaknesses in the body, so mine happened to have been like the kidneys. and the liver. And sometimes it's also the joints. So the body will try and get rid of the protein and the toxins rather, in the least way damaging to the overall effect of the body, functioning of the body. So it pulls it away from the main organs as long as it possibly can. So what it did for me is it settled in the joints, settled in the toes, in the knees, in the fingers, in the little bit in the elbow. So yeah, it's like that. So it's really, once I started to understand how that whole system worked, I became quite adamant that yes, definitely this is the way to go.
Right. Yes, and why punish yourself by carrying on doing something that's having a detrimental effect to your body.
Mm. Yes. And that's another thing that really I've trained myself, because there has to be a lot of self-talk, because there's a lot of habit, like for many years, decades actually, I was in this one kind of mindset, right? And so and the taste buds are there, right? And so things do taste good. So you have to, what I did was I literally just retrained my taste buds, so that the taste of the animal fat, even though I hadn't eaten animal fat properly, but the byproduct, even though the taste is there, I can now replace that taste and still enjoy having that taste. Yeah.
Right. Well, that sort of leads us, the next question that I sort of have for you is that, and you've touched on this, that it's human nature, that transition period is really the most challenging. And particularly when we arrive home tired and hungry, and you think, oh, just this once, I'll just slip back into one of my recipes or something. I'll just slip back into those old habits. So, what actually helped you? You've touched on that with replacing that, what your taste buds sort of wanted. But what other practical things helped you when you faced that situation?
Right. So one of the things that I did was, because it really is a mind over matter kind of situation, whenever we change anything in our diet or any kind of habits that we're changing, we have to come from this place of really knowing that I'm bringing benefit to the self, and this has to be the motivating factor for wanting to change the habit and then changing the behavior. So one of the things that I told myself is that I really wanted to avoid substituting. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to replace rather than to substitute, because if I'm substituting, then what I'm trying to do, and this is widely promoted now in all of the food stores, is they're, instead of replacing, they're substituting say for example, the sausage. So they're now substituting it with plant-based. So then they're saying it's plant-based sausage, right? So the mind is thinking that I'm getting sausage, and then the taste buds, they make it so that it tastes like sausage, right? So I don't want to substitute, I want to replace, because I want to start creating a new habit of eating. So, for example, I was thinking this in prep for the interview, I was thinking about, okay, what are some of the replacements that I have? So one of them is extra virgin olive oil. And actually, it turns out that I believe it's South America, they use that on their bread. They don't use butter because butter's not as widely available for them, for the locals. Olive oil is. And so, and also I know for the Mediterranean people also use olive oil a lot on just putting it on their bread. And so once I start using that, when the taste the real deal, so to speak, then that's what I start to want. And then I start to move away very slowly and very naturally from things that aren't good for the body. So that's one example. So it's, and then another example would be, so I used to do a lot of baking. I still do, not so much, a lot anymore, but I used to bake a lot. And then I had to find a replacement for eggs. And so I tried one thing and another, and I tried the egg substitute, and I just was not happy with the product. So I just started to teach myself different ways of using egg. And then I came across, a few years ago, I came across aquafaba, which is actually just the liquid from the beans. So it's bean water, actually. And that creates a very viscous, a very kind of similar texture to eggs. Also, you can do with soy, different kinds of soy bean I've been able to experiment with and nicely replace, like, say, for example, an omelet. Instead of making the omelet with the eggs, you make it with the different kinds of soy and a few other ingredients, and you've got this wonderful Italian frittata, which is plant-based, which is, yeah, quite. And people that I've made it for people and served it, people really don't know that it's not eggs. They don't miss the eggs, in other words, like that.
Yeah. No, that's great, because many of us, even though we're willing to try new things, we've got our favorite recipes. And so, those tips you've just given are great of how we can still use the recipe, but to get our favorite meal, but what we can use as a replacement, for the eggs. And also, what about a replacement for dairy, in recipes? What do you use? What would, have you found that works well for you?
Right.
In your favorite recipes that you had, could you use to replace the dairy?
Right. So dairy is a bit of a tricky one. And again, because of the taste. So, and also because of the texture. So one of the things that I use, because I actually am allergic to soy, so I don't tend to use the soy. And also soy milk isn't all that workable across the board. However, I found that almond milk is pretty workable across the board. So that means you can use it for things like scones, for breads, for pancakes, for cakes. Some biscuits might call for it. So that's a pretty good replacement. And then you just can add a little bit more body by using a small amount of tapioca starch or tapioca flour. Wow. And that will, pretty well substitute. And there's also some really good products out there, although you do have to read the label, because some of us might be sensitive to different kinds of stabilizers and different things that they use. But there are some really good products out there to substitute for milk for our tea and coffee. Yeah. And actually, I've taught myself in the recent times, past couple of weeks, actually, I've taught myself a couple of nice little drinks. So one of them is the I make a cappuccino. And what I do is I use the unsweetened almond milk, and I put it in a small, the small French press, I think they're called here. Are they called French press? The one where you put the coffee in the glass thing and you push it down.
Yeah.
So you just heat up the milk, not till after the boiling, but just before the boiling point. And then you just plunge it in the plunger, and then it just makes up this wonderful cappuccino, foam milk, So, and then you add a little bit of, I can't take raw sugar, so I take coconut sugar. You add a little coconut sugar, add a little cinnamon on the top. You've got a gorgeous cup of coffee.
Right.
So, very simple.
Right. That's great.
And
because that was one thing that so many people that I've talked to say, I decided to become vegan except for my coffee. And because they could never find anything that would really give that blend somehow of coffee and milk together that you get with either a flat white or a cappuccino. Yeah, so that's you get that sort of thin, watery taste.
Right.
So that's a good trick. That's
yeah. Because for me, if I can't, because I can have only limited amount of coffee a day. Yeah. So if I can't have a good coffee, then I'll just leave it. Won't have the coffee, right?
Yeah. And another thing, talking about the replacement of things, what would you use instead of butter in making things like cakes or scones or something like that? Do you go to a like a margarine, or do you have something else that you can use?
Right. So technically, if I'm cooking for myself and baking for myself, I would tend not to, because I, again, have allergies towards products. However, in Australia, I found that there's a very decent product without too many ingredients that are sort of not very healthy for the body. And can I say a brand name? I guess, because it's just us, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so it's the brand is Nuttelex, and it's now of course now they've come out with different kinds and whatever, but just look on the ingredients, and it's quite important to just look on the ingredients anyway, just to see, because they slip in animal products everywhere. It's just amazing when the things that you would think would not have anything to do with animals, they slip it in there. And sometimes they slip it in under a different name, and so you don't really know what it is, and they confuse the customer. But this product I know is quite good, and just look for the plain one. And you want to look for something that's got at least 65% of the plant-based oil, and a high quality oil like sunflower oil. Want to avoid the lower oils like canola, because they're a little bit harder for the body to digest. But that's a pretty good go-to, and it really makes a very good product. There's not too much of fiddling that you need to do in order to, if you have a favorite cake or scone recipe, it's very easy to just replace the butter with that. And also, if you add a little bit to, and this is a trick I use for if I'm making like casseroles or sauces, or even my porridge, I add a little bit. So little bit means if I'm making for, say, 6 to 8 people, I'd put in about a tablespoon of Nuttolx at the end and stir it in, and it just gives a richness to the porridge. And the same thing with when I'm making a sauce, I add a little bit of the Nuttolx at the end of the sauce, just again to give that richness. If I'm making like a casserole or beans, anything that needs a little bit more richness, I wouldn't add it, for example, if it was tomatoes, tomato based, but anything that's not, if it's more on the, like if you would add a meat to that particular bean recipe or something, then you just add a little bit of the Nuttolx at the end of the cooking. And that way you're not destroying the nature of the oils as well.
Yeah. Oh, there's some great tips. And the other thing we always get asked about either a vegetarian or a vegan diet is, how do we get our protein?
Right. That's one I get a lot of too. Yeah. So if, thinking about it logically, if the body is no longer growing, and so I think for women, it's about in our early 20s. For men, it's actually a little bit younger. It's opposite. They used to say the opposite, but now the figures have changed somewhat. But since that time, the body is no longer making new protein molecules. So it doesn't really need as much protein as it did. Now, everyone's going to be different levels of activity, of course. And then again, when we're 55, especially as women, we really don't need that much protein to sustain us. And it's very simple. My go-to Bible at the time in the 70s was Diet for a Small Planet, Frances Moore Lapay. And, she just broke it right down and said, this combined with this. And if you look at all the cultures of the world who are more or less plant-based, the Asian cultures, South American, Latin American cultures, African cultures, what they do is they mix their plants. And when you mix the plants together, then they create a perfect protein template. So we need 8 essential amino acids in the body in order to make our protein. In order to get those, all I need to do is a simple combination. For example, if I'm making, as I did this morning, porridge for the family. So I used a couple of different kinds of grains, and then I used sunflower seeds, and I used flax seeds, and then so those 2 combinations of grains and seeds made a perfect protein. So they would give as much protein, for example, as a couple of poached eggs or fried eggs, or however people used to take their eggs. So that would be the equivalent. So 1 serving of the porridge would give the equivalent of that. And then, of course, I'm adding more protein to it if I'm going to be adding some soy milk or almond milk. So not so much, but the soy milk has a good amount of protein for each serving. So it's very easy to do. Even something like a snack, if I'm taking like a trail mix, all I need to do is just combine different seeds and nuts, and then I'm creating, again, a perfect protein complement. So just a little bit of forethought, and it doesn't take very much at all either, to make the protein balance. And the only thing that I researched that is important to know is that it's better to not leave more than a 20-minute space between each one of the different proteins that you're eating. So for example, if I'm eating a grain, then I don't want to wait more than 20 minutes to add, say, for example, if it's something simple like a piece of bread and whole wheat bread and peanut butter. So that's a perfect protein combination, but I don't want to eat the toast with a little bit of like avocado on it, and then after a while, and then eat another piece of toast with the peanut butter. So I want to try and get it together within the 20 minutes, and then the body can just start to build the protein from both of those sources.
And pulses, they give us quite a bit
Yes,
of protein.
right. So there's legumes, so you can do any kind of legumes, beans, even fresh peas, fresh beans, dried beans, as I said, and any one of those together with a grain or a rice, for example, grains and rices, that also will make a perfect combination. And just think about, like in Mexico, they'll have a burrito. So a bean burrito is one of their things that they make a lot for street food. So you've got your grain with your corn or your wheat, and then you've got the bean. So you've got perfect protein combination with that. In Asia, I know they'll have a tofu with rice. Again, another perfect protein combination. In the Middle East, they'll have sometimes they'll have like a grain, but not really a rice. They'll have something else. I can't quite remember, but they'll have a grain, and then they'll have like lentils together. So I'll have a pulse and then the grain with it.
Yeah, that's good.
And there's also some vegetables also that also have proteins in them as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So really, in a plant-based diet, we're not missing out on our protein.
Absolutely.
There's plenty of it there.
No. And if you look at the size of some of these elite athletes with their like huge muscles, and especially the weightlifters, and the amount that they pull, like it's amazing to think that they're vegans, because what we're exposed to in the world, we're exposed to bodybuilders eating a lot of animal protein, and supposedly that's what's giving them their muscle mass, right? Which it is partly, but mostly they can get it, the whole thing, all just from plants. And this one quote from Patrick, and I'm going to, excuse me, Patrick, say your last name incorrectly, but it's like Bow Broughton, and he is a weightlifter, and he actually he broke his own world record. He was in the weight class of 105 kilos, and he actually walked, pulling on, he had on his neck, and attached to the neck was a wooden block, and then attached to the wooden block was chains, and attached to the chains was 560 kilos, and he walked 10 meters pulling. So amazing, and completely vegan. Like all of his protein came only from plant-based. Like that's just amazing.
Yes. Yes. So that myth can go.
Yes, quite easily go out the window. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, we can certainly get a well-balanced diet.
Yes. And
Following
one
a
of the
plant-based diet.
right, and one of the side benefits of the plant-based diet is that with plants, you're not eating the fat that's mostly associated with animal protein. And those are the fats that really cause damage to the body over a long period of time. Yeah, so you're not getting that at all with the plant-based diet.
That's amazing, Klig. You've obviously done a lot of research over the years.
Yes.
Probably experimented a little bit with your own body to to make sure that what you've been reading sort of does work. Yeah, so that's great. Thank you so much for all of that information. It's been quite illuminating.
Oh, good.
So I'd also like to thank all of you in the audience for being with us to listen to this wonderful information that Klig has had for us. And just before we go, I'd like to let you know about the environment programs that the Brahma Kumaris do in Australia. So you can keep an eye out on the Brahma Kumaris Australia Virtual Centre, which you'll find on our website, brahmakumaris.org.au. And also, starting at the beginning of February, you might like to join in on our Feel Good February Earth Care Challenge, where you'll be given a nature challenge every day for 28 days. Again, you can find further details on our virtual centre or on the Brahma Kumaris Australia YouTube channel. So thank you all for joining us, and I'll say good night.